This is the QooCam 8K and this is my second one. The first one had to go back to Kandao because of this. Today I'm going to tell you whether this one is any better and whether I'd buy this camera again with my own money. Hi guys, welcome, hope you're well. Today's video is a follow-up to the one I made in January on this camera and all of the problems that I'd been having with it. If you haven't watched that video already, check it out. I'll try and link it up here and down in the description below. So a lot has changed in the world since January, and thankfully this camera here has been updated a couple of times, so let's see whether those updates have made a difference. So full disclosure, although Kandao sent me this unit under warranty as a replacement, I bought the original with my own money, so you can rest assured that everything that I'm saying in this video is an honest user review and not influenced by anyone else. So before we talk about the specifics of the camera, I just wanted to talk about Kandao's customer service, which I've been really impressed with. They emailed me back within 24 hours of me contacting them, and they explained what was being done to address the issues that I'd raised with them. And most of that was going to be updated through firmware, but then when they saw that I had a problem with the fan noise, they asked me to send a clip of the camera by video, and I emailed that to them, and then within another day they had emailed me back saying that they would replace the camera and send it in and they would pay for couriering. And so yeah, it all worked out really well. There was a bit of a delay because of the virus, but overall really impressed with their customer service. So with all that being said, let's get into the actual things that you need to know about this camera, like image quality, audio, all that good stuff. So I'm going to show you a couple of side-by-sides with the One R, just to give you a comparison in terms of image quality. Now both these clips have come from the app and then exported out of the app, so it's only the 4K that you're getting when you do it through the app on the QooCam. You can't get 8K from the phone app, you need to do it on the desktop. And I'll get onto workflow in a minute, but the reason I've done that is so it's a fair comparison. So when we talk about image quality with this camera, obviously it's shooting 8K 30 frames a second and it's advertised as shooting 4K 120 frames a second. I've found the 8K to be quite soft. There seems to be inconsistency between the two lenses. And again, I need to talk to Kandao and see whether this is just this unit. There has been quite a lot of chat in the forums on Facebook about this issue, and part of it is to do with thermal heat issues on the camera and the fact that there's a kind of defocusing when the camera heats up. And I've done some temperature tests of this camera when it's been on, and it does get very, very hot still, even with the firmware updates. So the issue I've also found is I'm running a Mac and an iPhone, so I'm on Apple's ecosystem, and that has a problem in that I can't really use the desktop app because it's so bad on the Mac at the moment. I think they've just released an update for Windows, but they haven't yet released an update for the Mac. So at the moment I'm doing most of the exports from my phone, and with that you only get 4K because it can't export the full 8K from the phone. Even with the 8K Express Edit, it's a 4K file size at H.264. So you're losing quality there, and if you do render it out on the Mac, it takes absolutely ages. Okay, so rendering an 8K clip at 200 megabits per second, and it is taking about 45 to 50 seconds for 8 seconds of footage. So I'll come on to workflow later, but it's definitely hampered at the moment by the software that's coming with this camera. And unless you've got dedicated 360 software for reframing video, then it's going to be a challenge for you if you're on Mac or iPhone. So previously on my last camera, I had purple banding and fringing on the 4K 120 footage. That has been removed on this camera. This unit does not suffer from that, and the firmware updates seem to have resolved all those issues, which is great. What I have had though is when I've been trying to edit the 4K 120 footage on the app on the phone, it seems like the footage suffers from, it's like the gyro or the stabilisation or something has not worked, particularly during the first parts of the recordings. So you get this weird jittery footage, which I'll try and put some up on screen now. The other thing I found is when you're trying to edit that footage in the phone app, it's nigh on impossible to edit because you do like keyframes or tracking, and then once you've done that, you export it and it hasn't actually had any effect on the footage, so it hasn't reframed it as you expect it to have. So as you can see from this clip, I had actually reframed and tracked it onto my face and it's nowhere near my face. So I have put a 4K clip through the desktop app and then reframed it in the GoPro FX reframe in Premiere, and that has worked okay. And this clip of my mate when we were playing golf the other day worked quite well, but again, the image quality isn't brilliant, and actually I think overall the One R delivers a nicer looking image straight out of camera than this camera does at the moment. Now your mileage may vary if you've already got this camera. I know a lot of people have used it on the PC system and Windows and it works really quite well. But I feel like given that we're 5 months on from this camera being released, that the software should be in a much better state than it currently is. And you shouldn't be having these issues with the 4K reframing and the 8K. It should just all work, and it doesn't currently. I think the dynamic range is okay on this camera. I've been a bit disappointed. I think because of the bigger sensor size, I thought it would be a little bit better than it is. It seems when it's set to auto settings, it seems to really blow out the skies, and it also seems to have quite a blue temperature to the footage. So if you are using this camera or thinking about using this camera, I would recommend trying to set manual settings as much as you can, and manual white balancing as well. So I think photo quality with this camera is similar to the video quality. If you're using only auto settings, you're going to struggle to get the best out of this camera. You really need to dive into the manual settings and set this camera up properly.
Found a good little spot with some nice highlights and some nice shadow areas on this tree and in the canopy and in the sky. So going to try out some photos and see what we get. I'm going to use HDR on the Insta360 and then DNG8 on the Kandao, and then maybe try the Super HDR as well.
The JPEGs I think are okay, but they're not really any better than something like the Insta360 One R. The DNG8 files again are decent, but when it does the Express edit, which have just released in the new firmware, so it does it all in the app for you, it seemed to be blowing out the highlights quite a bit. I have been impressed with the Super HDR mode, which they've just introduced with the latest firmware. You have to use that through the camera app, so you need to be connected to the camera through the phone app, but it does produce really good images, and again, if you use manual settings you get even better results. But again, I don't think it's a particular improvement on other cameras on the market, and actually I think the Theta Z1, from what I've seen, would take better images if you're just looking for a camera to take photographs with for 360. So as you can see, this camera is quite chunky, and it's not quite as wide as the Insta360 One R, but it's pretty close to that. So it is quite a wide camera, and because of that, the stitching isn't as good as some other cameras on the market. But I think overall it does a decent job. So in these tests, I put a tape measure on the floor and just stood at different distances to the camera. Obviously the camera's static, but gives a good idea of a comparison between the One R, this, and the One X. And then I've got some other tests that I've done on the bike and running and things like that, where the camera is actually quite close, like when it was mounted on my shoulder on the bike, for example. So that will give you a good idea. Go back to 1 foot, let me just do that. So that's 2 foot, 2 foot now. What's the differences between the three? As you can see, I've got a tape measure on the floor here, so I can measure. This is now at 3 foot or 1 meter roughly. I'm outside now, One R here, Kandao here, One X here. Sorry about the noise, someone's chainsawing in another garden. I'm at 1 foot away here. See what this looks like, the sun's there. So sun is in the stitch line. If I move back to 2 feet, this is 2 feet away. And then I'm just going to move back to 6 feet. That's about 6 feet. How do I look as I walk up the cameras? At what point do I get worse? Right, I'm right up to the cameras now. I just move along. So this is the One X. That's the One X. This is the QooCam. And this is the One R. And now on the other side of the cameras, that's the One R. This is the QooCam. And this is the One X. So as you can see from that footage, it's pretty comparable in terms of stitching to the One R and also the One X. It's probably not quite as good as either of those cameras, but it's pretty close to it. And I think where it probably falls down slightly is when you've got a moving image where the camera's not static, it doesn't keep up as well as like the One R. I think with the recent firmware does really well at kind of keeping up with the stitching as you're kind of moving around in the frame. And this doesn't do quite as good a job as that camera. But again, it's good enough that you could make it usable for most situations, and it depends whether that's something that's going to be a deal breaker for you. So I've actually been quite impressed with the stabilisation on this camera. I've actually compared it against footage from the One R and the GoPro MAX, and actually it holds up pretty well. I'd say you can notice in the background of the shot that it doesn't stabilise on the edges of the frame quite as well as the One R, for example, but I'm not sure you'd ever be using this camera as a dedicated kind of action sports camera like you might do with the GoPro MAX and the One R. It's quite bulky and quite heavy compared to those cameras, and I've not really enjoyed having it kind of mounted to myself. It's been kind of wobbling around and quite difficult to mount on your person. So I think overall the stabilisation is good enough for what it needs to be at the moment, and hopefully it will get better with firmware as well. So again, with the audio, I did a couple of tests side by side with the Insta360 One R. So this is an audio test of the QooCam 8K internal microphone. And this is an audio test of the One R internal microphone with no wind reduction. So this is the QooCam 8K audio test, internal microphone only. How does it sound? How does it sound compared to the One R? And then this is also a walking test to see what the stabilisation is like. They're both side by side. They're on a selfie pole. I'm not holding it particularly steady, bumping around a little bit. And then how does it look when I'm backlit? So all of these clips are shot in the 8K 30 frames a second 10-bit colour, and the Insta360 is in 5.7K 30 frames a second, and it doesn't have 10-bit colour. So I think the biggest issue with the audio on this camera is actually that although the sound quality is okay, it is very, very quiet out of the internal mics, and you can't boost it on the camera itself, so there's no way to boost like the preamp like you would on a mirrorless camera like I'm filming on now. It would be nice if you could do that in the app or in the actual in-camera menus, but you can't at the moment. Hopefully that's something that could be resolved with firmware, I'm not sure. But yeah, once you boost the audio signal up a bit, it sounds okay. Compared to other cameras like the Insta360, it's probably similar, slightly better maybe. I'd say it's not as good as the GoPro Max. That has got the best straight out of camera audio that I've found in terms of consumer 360 cameras so far.
I am about a foot away from both cameras and they're just on a bracket together. What I'm going to do is walk a few feet away from the cameras and see what they sound like. I'm not going to change my voice, so I'm walking away now.
One benefit this camera does have though is that you can plug in an external microphone just on the side here, and that allows you to either run a wireless system, like I've got the Wireless Go from Rode, which I've actually used with an extension cable. So I've plugged in an extension cable, run it down the stitch line, down the pole, and then it's completely hidden from view, and then plugged it into the receiver for the Wireless Go, and then had my lav mic set up. Or sound like I've plugged in the Rode Wireless Go and I've put in like an extension lead that takes it down all the way down the pole into my pocket, and it should be in the stitch line, so hopefully that won't show up. Let's see what it looks like. So if I walk like this, can you see it? And it works really well, and you can then adjust the sound using the microphone as well as in post-production. Whereas the other cameras on the market, like the Insta360, you have to get an adapter for external audio, which is fine, but it costs extra money, of course. And GoPro Hero 8, for example, has a very expensive audio adapter. I think it's about $50. So yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses with the audio, but overall it's not brilliant, but it's okay. So this camera has an internal battery only, and it's quite a good sized battery, but because it's internal it does restrict you. You can't just change out the battery like you can on other cameras. I'd say battery life with this camera is decent. It's not amazing. You can get probably about, I've had between an hour and 10 minutes of record time when you're filming in 8K, and similar, maybe slightly less when it's filming in 4K 120. But overall, it eats the battery quite a lot when you're using it with the Wi-Fi on and you're transferring files or downloading files to the app. That actually seems to eat the battery more than when it's recording. But yeah, overall it's fairly good for battery life, but you can power it by USB-C as well, so that's a nice touch. So if you are doing like a hyperlapse, time-lapse or something that's gonna need the camera on for a long time, you can use like a power bank of some sort. I've actually bought the Ulanzi power bank grip, which I'll do a separate review on, but that's quite a nice feature because you can attach it onto the camera below the selfie stick and then run a cable up to the camera. So with 360 photography and video, there's always going to be a more complex and time-consuming workflow, but with this camera it's particularly time-consuming and particularly difficult. I'm going to show you some clips now of me trying to edit the footage that you've seen in this video.
Okay, so we're in the QooCam app now. I've connected to Wi-Fi and I'm going to try to get this file downloaded. It's 1 minute 45, and this is the problem with this. You can't do what you can in the One R app. So the One R app allows you to edit straight through the Wi-Fi without downloading first. It doesn't need that step anymore, and it saves so much time. Because with this camera you have to download, which because it's 8K takes ages. Once it's downloaded I'll be able to edit it, but that'll be slow because the timeline scrubbing and all that kind of stuff is really slow compared to the One R. And the same should be said for the GoPro Max. Actually, that's much better than this as well. I would say the One R is the best, but yeah, this is so slow. And then once I've edited it, I've then got to export it, and that takes ages because it uses the 8K Express edit, and you've got to connect the camera again, and then after that it then converts it to a flat video. So it's just like a 4-stage process compared to the One R, where you just edit it quickly and then it's job done, and you can just export it out at 1080p, and actually the quality is really good. Okay, so some minutes have elapsed probably about, I don't know, I'll have to check because I'll be able to tell on the phone, but I'd say it's about 5 or 6 minutes and it's still downloading. And this is a 1 minute 45 clip. I know it's 8K, but the Wi-Fi on this is just really slow. Okay, so finally we're in. So the issue with this is that when you scrub, whereas on the One R it's just quick and scrubbing is seamless, on here it is not. QooCam app, you can do stuff like you can key point, you can smart track if I wanted to smart track on my face. I can do it there, and it's okay, it's not as sticky as the One R app at all. You can change the projection, but the problem with that is, whereas with the One R you've got that viewfinder mode, which I love for editing, it's really good. If you sit in a desk chair it's perfect. With this you don't have that, so it's just very clunky. It feels like the old One X app maybe when it first came out, or maybe even the Insta360 One app before the One X.
So with the phone app, the main issues I found is that they've tried to make it like the Insta360 One, but it's like a poor version of that. It just doesn't have the same functionality and features of the latest One R app. It feels more like it's a generation or maybe 2 generations behind, similar to what the One X app was like when it first came out. And because of that, it just takes a lot longer to edit all the footage that comes off of this if you're using a phone to do it. And because it's 8K, it's just that much more time consuming. The fact you have to download the footage onto the phone, which is now a step you don't have to do with the One R. Yeah, overall it's just frustrating.
Quick look at the Super HDR images and the DNG 8 images. So this is the Super HDR. So obviously I moved, so that's why it's done that, but it just looks quite flat and just a bit uninspiring really. And you can add a filter and that's fine, but again there's just a real lack of options in this app, because in the One R app down here you would have the ability to change contrast, colour, exposure, all that good stuff, and you can't do it in here. I did a time lapse with both One R and the QooCam, and this is what the One R did, which I think is brilliant. It basically recorded a video, sorted it all out in camera, and then this is the end result. So literally I've done nothing to this, and obviously then if I want to I can start to pan around like a normal video. I could keyframe it, and it's just so fluid and so simple, and it's the exact opposite on the QooCam. It's taken about 10 minutes, I know that because I've been watching a video on YouTube, to download a time lapse that I shot with the QooCam. So I did one with the One R, and that was recording video. The QooCam actually recorded still shots, about 200, and then created this video. So as you can see, you can pan around, and that looks pretty cool, but it's only 6 seconds long, whereas the One R produced something that was a little bit longer than that for about the same amount of time. So again, I did manually adjust the camera settings to try and eliminate the blown out highlights, but still got them here. It was so easy on the One R because I could use the viewfinder and just move the phone around. On here I can't do that, so let's try and just keyframe it. So anyway, that is how I would do it on there, and then I would export to album, and you can do 360 or flat, but I'm going to do flat for this. And then here we go, this is what I'm talking about. Then we've got another step, we've got this 4K flat video saving, so that just adds another step, even though we've already downloaded the file.
So I'm on a 2019 highly spec'd iMac and it's got 72 gig of RAM. So I would expect to be able to edit the footage that comes off this camera fairly simply. And the biggest problem I've found is the software that comes with it, the QooCam Studio. First of all, it's really hard to find the actual version you need. The first version I downloaded for this just didn't work at all. I had to speak to Kandao before I could actually find it. It wasn't on their website. Once you've got it, it can render the files from this camera, but the problem is, unlike Insta360 or GoPro, who have actual software that you can edit the footage in, this will only render the footage out and export it. So what you're left with is then another step to take it into Premiere or Final Cut or another piece of editing software to do the actual editing. Whereas in Insta360's desktop studio or the GoPro equivalent, you can actually reframe footage and do all that stuff and then export a final file out of it. And it's just way easier and way quicker to do all of that stuff. And I just don't feel like the actual quality of this camera justifies the kind of extra time that you put in.
2.5 minute clip at 8K rendering time on a 2019 Mac with 72 gig of RAM and fully spec'd up processor and graphics card, highest one you can get. Took 21 minutes 39 seconds, so that gives you an idea of time involved in creating videos with this camera.
So I've actually done another video which I've uploaded today, which I'll try and link up here and in the description below, but that is just some sample footage. So if you're wanting to view the footage in 360 on like a headset or just on YouTube using like panning around the screen, you can do that and that will give you an idea. I've uploaded that footage at the best possible quality. It's been done on the desktop, so it's done at the highest quality and it should give you an idea of kind of what you can get out of this camera, but it did take a long time to produce that video. So I think my conclusion on this camera is that it's almost there, but it's not quite. And the main issue is that it's trying to span the kind of gap between consumer 360 cameras like the One R or the GoPro MAX on one end of the scale, and then more pro level cameras that are, you know, upwards of $4,000 or pounds. And it's sort of doing that, but the software that comes with it just isn't good enough. The app just isn't good enough yet. It's getting better all the time, but there's, you know, given it 6 months since they released this camera, it feels like it should have been better already when it got released, and certainly by now. And it's very frustrating for an end user like myself. For the average consumer, I just don't think people are going to want to spend the time that is required to get the best out of this camera. And if you're a pro level user, fine, you'll probably have the software dedicated for exporting these kind of files. You'll probably have a computer that's capable of it, and you won't be doing it on the phone. But for most people who want to use stuff like this for social media, it's just not going to work for them. And it's unfortunate because they're trying really hard to kind of give you that 8K capability in your pocket, and it's got so much potential, and I hope they keep upgrading the firmware. I hope the software for the desktop gets way better, for the Mac particularly. And overall, I hope that this company succeeds. But at the moment, I still would be hesitant to recommend it to someone. I think I would recommend it if you know all the pitfalls and you're happy to take on the kind of workflow issues, but otherwise I think I'd be recommending like the One R or something like that, that gives you a lot more user-friendly options and the ability to produce content a lot quicker. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please do leave a like and comment below with any questions you've got. And also click the bell for notifications, and if you do like this kind of content, please do subscribe to the channel. We're going to be bringing a lot more videos in the coming weeks, and I will see you in the next one.